And laying here on my lift is pretty much the guts of a 62 XLCH. This is the one we're going to talk about most here. We're going to take this the rest of the way apart, and I'm going to show you what's screwed up about it, and it's got plenty screwed up. I think you'll enjoy it. Men, and I use the term loosely. Alright, we're going to begin this video by taking this engine the rest of the way apart and kind of assessing the damage and the work that needs to be done. And this is how I received it. So apparently they took the bolts out of the crankcase, lifted the right crankcase half off, somehow restrained the flywheels, knocked the big nut off, took the right flywheel off and the rods off, and they did this without removing the sprocket shaft from the Timken bearing. So that's kind of a trick. But anyway, we're going to take it the rest of the way apart and get started on it. Alright, so let's get the flywheel out of here first. I got my sprocket pushing tool. This one's coming out easy. The sprocket shaft's already broke loose of the pinion. Excuse me. The sprocket shaft has already broken loose from the Timken bearing. There it goes. Piece of cake. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is drive the seal retainer for the outer roller on the Timken out. And I got a tool that's designed to push on the inner race, which will grab the inside edge of the rollers and put pressure on them evenly all the way around. And it will push the seal and the reseal tainer up through the boss. You could beat them out with a hammer. However, you run the risk of damaging the bearing cage. This gets them out in a condition where they are easily and safely reusable. Although I don't think I'll be reusing them on this engine, because this engine has had a lot of metal run through it from the chowdered crank pin. And that's all there is to that. Alright, now we're just going to drive the Timken out with a regular bearing driver. That one came out pretty easy. Now, one of the things I do with them, in case I decide to use it over again, which I'm probably not because this engine has been through a lot, but one of the things I will do is I will engrave which side is in, which side faces in with the Dremel tool, and I do that almost immediately so as not to get it mixed up. It says in on it with a little arrow, so that if I did choose to reinstall it, I could. Okay, this owner's going to get a big bill, and people wonder why. You know, gee, how could it cost so much? Well, you got layers of epoxy from here to here, so this must be cracked underneath there. It's stripped with a bad Healy coil, 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 cracked, stripped, bad Healy coil, cracked, stripped, bad Healy coil. You know, this adds up. You got a bad Healy coil in here. As a matter of fact, that Healy coil is hanging out over here. The through bolts look okay. Actually, this is kind of interesting. Let's look at this. The right side of the crankcase was blown out and was all welded in. When that blew out, I think it took the motor mount with it, and it cracked a big chunk of material out over here. Rather than weld this all up and mill it flat like probably should have been done, they just ran the stud in, so it's probably catching 3 or 4 threads down in the bottom of this hole. So that needs to be fixed. This is stripped out. This area in here, you know, I said these welds are all chowder. They're actually not really that bad, but right in through here, this metal is probably barely 1/8 of an inch thick. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to weld over all this and build it back up. It's going to be a pain in the ass because it's all soaked with oil. This weld here was welded on the inside, and what you're looking at out here is just evidence of penetration, which is a good thing, but I could still see the crack runs through, so that's going to get re-welded. Just kind of a mess. For those of you unfamiliar with double nutting, you run 2 nuts on there, tighten the top one against the bottom one, and then when you go to take them out, you take them out by turning the bottom one, and they come out. Geez, this thing was only held in by maybe 3 threads. With the amount of metal that was shed off of the crank pin and the rod rollers, I'm really surprised that this is not chewed all the fuck up. But it's in pretty good shape, it looks like. Let's look at this. The counter shaft needle bearing is right here. There was a sleeve around the counter shaft needle bearing, and the sleeve apparently is pressed in to some weldment, and you can see the edges of it around here. Okay? We're going to flip it over and look at the other side. I don't think this is centered correctly. Then you've got this bolt over here with the bad Healy coil in it, and it's cracked all the way out to this edge. So this has got to be welded. Okay, The whole back of the case, all in through here, has been blown out and welded in. It actually doesn't look too bad. Aesthetically, I might do something. They've got they had to grind it out to allow the engine mount to fit up in here, but they didn't grind this off. I may flatten this all out just to, make it look consistent. Okay, the part of the case that I'm concerned about is all of this in here. Here is that replacement boss that was welded in. They do have penetration coming through to the back side, but this over here looks like it was smashed a little bit, and to me it looks like the shaft was bearing heavily on this side here. So I don't think the shaft, I don't think this whole arrangement is opposite of the bearing on the trapdoor side. So I'm going to be taking a real close look at it. And one of the first things I'm going to have to do with this case after getting it cleaned up is I'm going to have to bolt it together and see how the transmission fits. Anyway, now look at this over here. Somebody milled out the steel insert that was cast into the case, and it's just flat ass gone. I don't think there's going to be any replacing this thing. That'd be a job I haven't tackled anyway. I can only assume that the bearings failed and cracked and tore up the cast in place steel insert. Let me show you something I found though. This bearing was laying around with all the parts, and it is just exactly the right size. And the inside diameter is just exactly the right size for the main shaft. So it looks like they replaced the steel race, the cast-in-place steel insert, and the individual rollers with a deep groove ball bearing. I gotta hand it to them. This is very similar to what Harley used on the Evo Transits, and I always wondered why they didn't use a bearing like this in the first place on this thing. It'd be a bunch easier to set up. This owner's doing kind of this owner would like to do kind of an Econo rebuild on this. And he's got the idea that he could sell this bike and still make some money even after I do the engine. I don't see it happen. There's going to be, I look at all those little bits of welding here and there, and this thing is going to be expensive. It's going to be really expensive if I find that this doesn't line up with the counter shaft bearing on the trapdoor. Then he's going to have to redo all of this, and that's going to be fucking expensive. But anyway, clever. This I think I'm just going to leave alone. The cost of fixing it and the soundness of the repair, I don't know that would be any better than the arrangement he's got in here now. So there's no numbers on this bearing. It should be pretty easy to measure it and figure out what size it needs to be. Okay, here's the piston that is less bad, and it is already a 70 over piston. That's pretty bad. Yeah, that's no good. Okay, here's the piston that is worse. It's also 70 over, and there's actually a hole. Goes all the way through. So I'm sure the compression on this one was 0. The jug has corresponding torn up areas. So you got 70 over pistons, 70 over jugs. There are 80 over pistons, but I don't think the cylinder is going to clean up with 80 over, so he needs a pair of cylinders and a pair of pistons, getting more expensive by the minute. Oh, and FYI, the rods have this RPLS and then the Harley number. So these are Japanese or Chinese copies. The RPLS stands for replaces HD 242 98-52. So these are copy rods. You know, if it was my bike and I was building it for the long term, I'd get rid of these and I'd put HD rods in there. This guy is kind of on a budget, so I'm probably going to try to lap these rods and see if I could get them to work. And just FYI, without measuring, I could tell you the wrist pin bushes are shot. Look how much rocking there is in the wrist pin bush. So yeah, this is going to need a bunch of work. I'm going to give you a little bit of a close-up of the tool I used to take the sprocket shaft bearing, the Timken bearing, off the sprocket shaft. Basically, it was a piece of, I think this was a piece of pipe. It might have been regular steel too, but I think I made it out of a piece of pipe. A hose clamp to kind of help hold it together. Steel bar across the top that goes into bolted to a threaded hole on each half of this steel disc on the top. And that's all there is to it. There was a big thick, I made a big thick steel washer to weld into the bottom of the end. It's got a couple of recesses machined into it so that it'll slip nicely under the bearing. This is a piece of hardened thread and rod. And this steel bar came out of a computer hard drive, a 1980s era computer hard drive, where the hard disks were a foot and a half, 24 inches across, big heavy hard drives, and big heavy magnets. The magnet was bolted to this piece of steel. Anyway, that's kind of a close-up of the tool. So let's use it to pop the sprocket shaft bearing off the sprocket shaft. Okay, the tool is designed to fit under the bearing. And it kind of just barely fits, but that's what you want. Put this clamp on it to keep it from spreading. This one's coming off pretty easy. And that's it. You know, is it worth making a tool like this to get the bearing off one time? Probably not, but you know, I've used this thing dozens, if not 100 or more times. So if you're going to do more than once, it's definitely essential. And there's the bearing. I talked about marking the race. I also, if I'm going to use this bearing over again, I mark the bearing so I know where it goes. I like to keep the double race and the double race, the outer bearing, and this will be the inner bearing, in the correct orientation so the wear patterns will match up. I don't worry about that with a lot of the other races and bearings, but this is, you know, important, so I do. And I just mark it in so I know which side faces in. And then we'll take the crank pin out. Man, that one's tight. And I detect Loctite, of course. And now we'll take the sprocket shaft off. Man, that one was tight. Alright, this is the crank pin, and you could see where the rods and the rollers just hammered this thing. Center, the male rod, the female rods, a lot of damage on here. There was a lot of pulverized metal that went through this motor. All three of the bearing tracks have where you could feel. Two are really bad. I mean, this, you can measure this with a ruler. This is a 64th of an inch deep, probably. The one isn't so bad, but you could still feel it. Anyway, I will say this about that, is this pin is not a Harley pin. It has the oil passageway blocked with a plug, and Harley, you would see it probably welded on. Jims, you would see a hex plug in there, but the Jim ones would also be engraved Jims. The fact that these were the Japanese or Chinese replacement rods would lead me to believe that this is a Chinese or Japanese replacement pin. No brand name on it, so it's an unknown. Is that why this failed? You know, I don't know. Oiling problem? I don't know. You know, this is one of those things that make me leery of using foreign parts. I mean, I don't know for sure that it failed due to some kind of, shortfall in manufacturing, or whether it was some other cause, but, you know, you just don't know. Anyway, there will probably be a Jims going back in this, just because. And then we have the sprocket shaft. Sprocket shaft looks okay. We're going to put it on the lathe, and we're going to check the run out on it before we use it. This is the pinion shaft, and there's some interesting things to notice here. See this? These lines, these wear lines, those are caused by the end of the pinion shaft hitting a connecting rod. So there's a little bit of the pinion shaft that sticks out above the surface of the nut, and it was hitting the connecting rod. On some engines, I end up machining off the last thread, and there ain't but 4 threads to begin with, so you know you don't have a lot of wiggle room on these things. But you know, if it's going to hit the connecting rod, you really have got no choice. On other engines, I'll take a 3-inch sanding disc and just sand it off flat with the side of the nut. You know, not desirable, but better than it hitting the connecting rod every time the engine revolves. Here's something else in the area of crappy ass workmanship, and I don't know if I could get it to focus here for you on this. Yeah, maybe. The snap ring that retains the bearing was sacked out, I think, when they installed it. I don't think this happened after installation. But you see, the snap ring is so stretched that it isn't even falling in the groove. It was just kind of hanging there. And you might be able to see this. The snap ring was dented and bent. So, not a good installation. I don't think this could have happened after it was installed. You know, maybe it could have, but I think the snap ring was just all stretched out and they put it on anyway. I'm sure it would have failed eventually. But anyway, this will get replaced, obviously. We'll peel it out of there and get rid of it. Otherwise, it looks okay. The bearing surface is nice. There are some scratches. Well, there are some marks. Not really a scratch, but there's a little irregular wear on the end, and I'll probably put a little 600 or 1000 grit on that in the lathe and polish it up a little bit. But obviously this is going to be checked for run out. An engine that was hammered so bad, I'm going to take a lot more careful look at everything than perhaps I normally would. There was a lot of violence going on in this motor. Here's something else that's maybe worth looking at. The thrust washer must have gotten loose in here and had started sawing its way through this inner diameter of the crank pin hole. The crank pin was obviously very tight, so I don't think the taper is damaged, and in the overall scheme of things, I don't think this little bit of metal missing is going to be important, but obviously we're getting a new thrust washer in here. These flywheels, somebody added some weight back into the lightning holes and welded it in. So, you know, one time there was a lot of effort put forth in this motor to try to make it good, yet it all went sour on them. Okay, remember when I was looking at the crankcase and saw some damage there, and I said something like when the trans blew out, it probably took out the motor mount? Well, here's your evidence of that. This has all been welded and ground down in here, which is in that same area. We got some welding in here. You see these two beads. This is, you know, this to me looks like MIG wire, you know, got going a little too fast. And we got big gobs of welding through here. This is going in the scrap aluminum pile. You know, they're not that expensive, so you may as well buy a new one. You know, yeah, I could dick around with it, but by the time I dick around with it, you're going to have money into it, which it probably doesn't warrant being spent on this thing. It was cracked and welded in through here. They all cracked and welded in through here. It was cracked and welded over here. There was a very weird hole drilled and threaded in the top of the trans case that lines up with this. I think the guy must have done it to add fluid to it, and this might be how he put fluid in it without having to go through the inspection cover on the primary. On the old bikes, these things are 4 holes. On the later years, and I don't know where exactly, what year it was, but somewhere along the line, they only had these 2 holes, and I've actually done a mod where I just cut this off. When you think about it, and this thing is bolted in place, it's only from here and aft that's carrying the load, really. These aren't doing anything. All this meat past the line formed by these 2 bowl holes isn't doing shit, so you don't need any of it. And you know, I just cut these off a lot of time anyway. But this one's going in a scrap aluminum pile. He needs a new one. I like to save these things, and I knock them out and I save them because I find a lot of them are stripped and you could just pop a new one in there. So I'll save these 2, and this is going to go to the scrap pile. And you know, for tonight, I think I'm out of here. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do some power washing and some sandblasting and get an idea of where exactly this project needs to go. So I think that will be the next video, and I'm going to try to let you all follow this 62 through from beginning to end, because you know it's got some unusual things done to it, and it's a little more interesting than the typical rebuild. So we'll follow this one through, and I'll keep you posted. For now, I am out of here. But hey, you know the drill. Coffee cups and stickers. Join me on Patreon. But most of all, hit the subscribe button. That helps out the most. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye.